Nice. So pretty varied, I see. Great. I see CS, business. So Marshall, Viterbi, public relations. Good. Viterbi again. Econ. So econ is Dorn Sci, I think. CSBA. Yes, that's what I did. Tina. Great. Chemistry PhD. Look at that, Andrew. That's awesome. Applied econ.
That's up there. It's a lot of
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Um, I think we can get started now.
Another
I see a
CSBA.
good mix. Yeah, so I see a great like good mix of students from different majors. So we can get started. Hello everyone, welcome again to the Tech Startup panel. Today we have three panelists with us, and we hope you get a lot of insights into the startup industry, the emerging AI technology, and other aspects of a tech startup from this event. A quick note before we start, this event is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube later. So if you're not able to access it, or if any of your friends are not able to access it at this time, you can always go back to the USC Career Center YouTube channel to look at the recording. And we have a packed agenda today, so we're gonna get started. I'll be your moderator, so we'll start off with some introductions, and then we're gonna go into a moderated Q&A. And then we're gonna open the floor to questions from you guys, from students. So if you want to ask a question, I'd highly suggest that you unmute yourself and ask a question. You can also ask it in the chat, but people who unmute will get the priority. And then we will end our discussion with some closing remarks. So, I'll just introduce our panelists real quick from this slide, and then maybe in the order that your name appears, you could introduce yourselves a little bit about what you do, your background, and I know, interestingly, all of our panelists today are USC alums, so a little bit about your time at USC, maybe. So I'll start off with Andrew.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Drafted. This is my second company. So, my first one I started as a freshman at USC and grew it to 500,000 in revenue, is in the nootropic space. And that was really my introduction into being a founder. I was a solo founder at the time, so much different than what Rodrigo and I are working on now. But really, one of the things that we wanted to tackle is in this AI boom, in this AI era. I think that the entry level hiring crisis has gotten a lot worse than what it was in the past decade, and it was already pretty bad. The average student is finishing university and spending 6 to 9 months on average looking for their first job, and 53% of them are underemployed, meaning they're not even using the degree that you guys are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for. So Rodrigo and I really understood that there's a massive issue that can be solved with tech, and we started trying to come up with innovative solutions on how do we solve this problem. And what we came up with is I've drafted a job seeker that's looking for an internship or a full-time job. All you do is create one profile. There's a short video resume, and you're able to auto apply to hundreds and thousands of startups instantly. Startups are really great for getting hired super quick. So the process to get a job at Google or Goldman will take 3 to 5 months, versus a startup can go from first interview to hired in less than 2 weeks. So we're targeting a ton of employers that are almost impossible to find, and we're giving you tremendous range. And really, our goal is getting folks hired, getting them using their degree, and getting valuable experience so that they're not competing for that same job at Google where the success rate is less than 1%. So I think our mission is very important to all of you folks here, especially that are going to be entering the workforce here in the next 3 to 4 months. So happy to show and tell more about the product that we've built and are working on. But we're partnered with multiple universities, including USC. So I can hand things over to Rodrigo to give a little backstory on himself as well.
Sure. So yeah, from my side, I'm currently CTO and co-founder at Drafted. I studied CSBA, as some of you here in SC in Viterbi. I also did a bit of machine learning research with Viterbi as well. And then after SC, I worked for around 4 years at Amazon as an engineer, and then applied AI engineering at Apollo Global Management. And today, our main focus is building real world AI and product systems through Drafted. And like Andrew said, our mission is to give candidates a real platform for standing out and using, their personal stories and strengths in order to apply to that dream job, especially as we see an increased demand to work in startups. We want to give all students the same visibility and not have to rely on an ATS system, which basically just takes in a resume and looks for, a combination of words to see if they give you the first interview or not. And that's how the idea of Drafted was born. So we support candidates with internships, full-time roles, and also for roles during school. So directly with AI labs for more data-oriented jobs, which we can definitely talk about. And that's something that we're just rolling out, and it's pretty exciting. But yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. I'm also from Caracas, Venezuela, and yeah, now in Miami with Andrew. Thanks.
Um, yeah, hi everybody. Um, Interesting to hear about what Rodrigo and Andrew are building. Like I wish I had that um, back in school. But anyways, I'm Ethan. I'm uh, from Canada. Studied business at USC, and I've been. I guess I can give some career background, but basically I've been involved in like the venture and startup space since 2021. I started off as like a venture scout for Draper Associates. It's like a relatively prominent Bay Area VC, and that was kind of my like first exposure to the tech industry. I got that role through like one of the entrepreneurship orgs on campus, so like Trojan Network is was helpful there. Um, my job was basically like sourcing startups, talking to different founders from across various verticals, and I managed to lead one deal at Draper Associates called Sign SIGN. It was like actually a USC founder. Sorry, one second. So it was actually a USC founder, and we invested in like a below $5 million valuation. Um, because I helped them find a deal, and I was like a sophomore looking for a job, that company ended up hiring me. So I worked as like a business development person there when like the team was like 7 people. So I was like seventh hire, and worked there for a total of 3 years. So throughout my time at Sign, we were building um, like SaaS tools to automate like business use cases, but using blockchain rails. So it was like during the 2021, 2022 Web3 craze, where like there's a lot of vaporware being built and funded, and a lot of experimentation around like the question like there's this thing called blockchain. It's useful for some things, and we're trying to like figure out what it can actually create real value, where it can actually create real value. So we focused on like legal use cases, like signing contracts, and automating certain like financial flows within a company, specifically like crypto companies. So yeah, as a business development guy at that company, I supported their like fundraise. So like they ended up raising a seed round at like an 8-figure valuation, which is crazy, but it was a sign of the times. Oh no, 9-figure valuation. Sorry. And it was like having participation from all three Sequoias, which was like kind of was lit at the time, but it also like made me skeptical. Like, wow, we were able to close such a big round despite our product traction. Like I don't not being up to par. So I got tired of like being a sales guy and transitioned to be a product manager, like motivated by the fact like I wanted to actually figure out where we could build products that solve real problems. And we ended up building a product. Like the product that I built is called Token Table. It's kind of like Carta, so like cap table management, but for token equity versus stock-based equity. And so I built that product during my second half at Sign, and like it scaled it to 15 million ARR. Um, and then I graduated like USC, and I was like, okay, I think my 3 years at Sign has taught me a lot, but I kind of want to build my own thing. I was also recruiting for jobs at bigger companies, but like I didn't have much luck. Maybe like the AI resume would have helped me, but so me and some buddies like teamed up to build something in the DeFi space, decentralized finance, and that's where my current job is came from. So like I graduated, we raised a small round for Ibisu, which is like a kind of, you can think of it as like a crypto lender. So we offer like fixed rate dollar loans against crypto collateral. So if you have like a Bitcoin, ETH, or some other like cryptocurrency that is like relatively blue chip, we can issue you like a dollar credit at a fixed rate against that collateral. And this is unique because like most of crypto lending is done on variable rates, but like in the real world, people like to borrow using fixed rates. So, anyways, it's a bit of a ramble, but that's kind of my background. And like, yeah, obviously focused on fintech, crypto, and more the intersection between like traditional finance and then decentralized finance. AI is really hot right now. We're obviously using a lot of AI in our company to help with software development and automating like operations, but um, quietly, like crypto industry is creeping into traditional finance. Nasdaq is like launching like 24-hour, 5 days a week trading, fueled by pressure from like the 24/7 crypto markets. They're implementing blockchain technology as like a ledger because it's just better, faster, cheaper. So not all crypto is a scam, and yeah, that's kind of what I've been working on.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you everyone actually for introducing yourselves and sharing a bit about your background. So we can dive into the discussion now. I guess to start us off, I would like to ask about the to give us a little bit of an overview of the startup industry for those who don't know, and for those who know, what they should know about entering the startup industry specifically. So, Ethan, if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, it's a broad question, I guess. So like, I guess we're going to be talking about tech startups, but I have friends and stuff who like have gone into like e-commerce or more traditional forms of business out of college, and I think that's also considered startup. But I think, yeah, panels about tech startups. So um, I guess just speaking from personal experience, how I got into it, I found a technology that I was interested in, and did a lot of. I had fortunately had a job, this venture scout job, that allowed me to network with professionals in the industry, basically showing that I'm like young, keen, hungry, and eager to do work for like little compensation just to mainly learn. Like I think learning is like getting knowledge and getting competency is like the highest leverage thing you can do, opposed to focusing on like paycheck, at least in the context of like breaking into startups. So try to do that, try to develop some skills. The first few skills I developed was like networking, learning about like the dynamics of like venture capital space. And that was what it was for me. But I know friends who break in, like they're focusing on like UGC, they're really good at marketing, or they're really good at copywriting, whatever kind of niche you can find you can like develop some competency in, that can be like your kind of edge. And then probably the best way to learn is to work. So like um, you may be like able, yeah, to work. So you may be able to like convince someone to give you an internship position. You can look for companies that just got fundraising, so like they would probably be keen to hire, or like early stage companies that are pre-fundraised. They're definitely hungry to hire, and may not have the funds, so they'd be like more willing to take on someone less experienced if they're not willing to ask for much pay. And yeah, basically just get your hands dirty. So that's like on one side, getting a sort of some sort of a junior role in a startup would be helpful. I think another thing is like hackathons and building things by yourself, like in the age of AI, vibe vibe coding, and or like teaming up with like a CSBA kid or like a CS kid, or like a adjacent technical, like a kid who's like technical adjacent, and just like using AI to figure out different products, launching it through like for hackathons to get some money, or just like filming a demo and posting it on Twitter. You can get a lot of exposure for like these little like vibe coded products. It may not be like a success, like have the foundation to be a trillion, like $1 billion business, but building something and shipping it is a great way to practice some exposure. So I'm rambling, but basically just do stuff and get good at it.
That is great advice, actually. Rodrigo, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Ethan said is or are things that I'm aligned with. I think the sooner you begin to just, getting your hands dirty and getting in there, whether it's, starting something, especially now that the barrier to build is at an all-time low, you can go ahead and start a business. Like for example, like Andrew, my co-founder, did during college. And I think there's a lot of benefits to doing it during college. And if not, just joining a startup maybe at not the most desirable pay or little. If you're flexible enough to do that, as Ethan said, the way that you're gonna be, remunerated is through experience, which I think is super valuable. So the sooner you go in there and, whether it's your own thing or someone else's, just start talking to customers, start building an actual product, anything that gives value in any way or form, and you start making yourself useful. I think that's the right way to start getting into the motion of it. Because at that point, you get comfortable with it and you just lose the fear of trying something new, which sometimes is what holds a lot of people back. I think that's the way to go. So very aligned with what Ethan said for sure. Just get yourself out there is what I would say. I don't know if Andrew wanted to add something there. He had the experience of
Yeah.
building something during college.
So I've been in startups since I was 18, so for like a decade, and I've done growth work and consulting work with YC startups. And, you know, when you talk about startups, everyone kind of assumes like a five-person team, but you have those small pre-seed and seed teams, and then you have a series B, C startup. Those are starting to become massive companies. And
Yeah.
really, in any of those stages, one thing, I think it's been mentioned twice, but the pay in most cases, especially if it's seed to series C, is going to be the equivalent of a big consulting job or a job at Fang. In almost all the cases, a Y Combinator startup that just raised a seed or is at Series A stage, the compensation is going to be almost identical. For the terms of getting hired there, like I said previously, it's much faster. You're pretty much just going to talk with the co-founders. There might be three calls with, both of them or one of the others. So in terms of hiring speed, it's a lot quicker. So I personally love that for all students. But in regards to the work in a large company like Amazon, where Rodrigo was at, you have this very small subset sliver within a small team within that subset. So it's a very focused and narrow view versus when you're at a startup, you're working with the product people, the operations people, you're talking with the CEO and the CTO every single day. You have full view of everything kind of coming together. And similar to what Ethan was saying, if for example you get in as a marketing role or a sales role, you can pivot into something else that you want to do, whether it's product or operations, or you're learning how to put all those pieces together. So that's why you see a ton of folks that are operators or early stage startups exit out and start their own companies, because they're like, okay, we need to hit these types of metrics in order to raise funding. This is what investors are looking at. Here's how you hire. You really get the blueprint when you're on the inside. So if you have ambitions to, be a founder, I still think one of the best ways to do it is, if you don't start something in college, which I think is important, then joining an early stage startup, being an operator for 2, 3 years, and then exiting and starting your own thing, I think is one of the best paths. And another piece is your progression in your career is way faster at an early stage startup. So that's why you can see someone go from an entry level SDR to a head of sales in 3 years, versus once you enter a big company, they really only will up level you every 3, 4, 5 years, because if someone moves up too quickly, they have no incentive to keep you around forever. So there's tons of differences between large companies and smaller, but I've only operated in the early stages. So, you know, happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Can I add a point there, please?
Yeah, for sure.
I really like what Andrew said. Like I think before, so you need to think about, why do you want to do startup? Like for me, I like it because it's hard. It's something that um, intellectually is stimulating, and I'm a lazy guy. I'm not trying to work hard if the task is like menial. Like if I was like doing desk jockey at a consulting firm, and like that's kind of what drew me to the space. But everyone has their own different reasons for doing startup, and I want to like touch on a point of like signal versus substance. Like you can go into startup wanting like the hardest job, the most learning, with the goal of like getting really competent, and then like solving a really hard problem and creating a lot of value for the world. Like this is like a fundamentalist view of startup. Like um, find some sort of problem and find PMF and create a lot of value. And this could be something hot, but this could also be something not hot, like the like, what do you call it? I don't know. Like the corner store laundromat creates a lot of value. That guy prints money, but it's not necessarily hot, and that's still value. And I think there's a lot of startups like like that may not be the sexiest, but are providing tremendous value. Nvidia was not like seen as hot and whatnot. They were seen as a gaming GPU company until everyone realized the tremendous value that they were sitting on. This is one angle for startup, and I think if you want to do this angle, you got to be competent. You got to like get some skill and become good. There's another angle that is also viable, which is like the signal angle, and it's like very popular. I've noticed growing more popular at USC and in these like more prestigious schools, which I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it's tech is very fast moving. You guys should all be on tech Twitter, like if you guys want are interested in startup of any kind, like to see what's hot. But there is like a kind of angle towards breaking into startups, which is like signal based, which is like you vibe code a project with like on the latest tech stack, and you film a Twitter demo and it goes viral, and you can like raise a pre-seed just off of that. And it may not be like foundations for a good business, but it's going to unlock a lot of doors in terms of like eyeballs, attention, network, and like playing this Twitter game and this like tech networking game, like becoming friends with the kids who are going to be at the next Mercor, the next whatever. It's another angle to become like a professional in the startup career. And then you have to like kind of pivot that clout into actual substance later down the line. And a lot of kids fail, like they're all cloud and they're no substance, but they still like make money and stuff from this. So I just want to put it out there that like get on Twitter, and the signal cloud tech route is like low key viable, but it can leave a bad taste in some people's mouths. I don't know if the other guys have thought this, but like tech Twitter can get annoying, but it's like definitely there's something there.
Yeah, there's always going to be a lot of noise. But I mean, I think there's definitely value to tech Twitter for sure.
That is some great advice from all of our panelists. So I guess moving forward, I know that Rodrigo and Andrew, your company works a little bit more with AI, so maybe this question could be a little bit more directed towards that. We know that AI is transforming the way work is distributed globally. So how would you suggest that students can start contributing earlier, either through data labeling, training models, or research assistance with AI teams?
Yeah, I'll hand this over to you, Rodrigo, for the bulk, but I think overall, when you look at some of the studies that are coming out and you see what the employment percentages are based on seniority, specifically for developers, you see that all of them are going upwards and only entry level is going downwards. And I think that you're going to start seeing that across marketing roles, not yet, but you will in the future. And sales roles, definitely, there's a ton of AIs that automate what a SDR typically does. So there's definitely an impact at the early level, but the only way that you can navigate that, and I think a ton of people fully understand this, is the workforce that's coming out right now is the most AI native generation ever. So if you are out there building while you're in school, whether it's even a project on your own and you didn't get any users, you're still using all of these tools like Claude Code or Cursor, or you're using Apollo for the SDR kind of plugins. You start to get a sense of what the tools are, how to use them. So you're not really becoming an entry level job seeker anymore. You have full understanding and fluency of what the tools are. So that's kind of one piece. But in regards to the data labeling and getting experience in college, I'll hand it over to our Rodrigo, because we're doing something really exciting that every student can take advantage of now, earn some cash and become, very fluent in what models are doing, and earn some cash while you're in school, which is really important.
Yeah. So like Andrew said, I think this is actually one of the biggest opportunities for students right now. So we are at a point in history in which AI labs increasingly need more and more human input. And a recent demand that we've seen is AI labs also want the input from college students, specifically in different fields. So, for example, if you're majoring in any type of science or engineering or even business, there are use cases in which AI labs will, pay great amounts just so you're able to train the model. And yeah, like Andrew mentioned, we just started offering that recently. So we're starting to partner with AI labs to be able to sort of provide value in the entire stack, meaning we'll support with internships and full-time roles, but also for anyone looking to have exposure to working directly with AI labs and start getting comfortable in those type of workflows. We are starting to offer jobs, specifically to what you're majoring in, what year you are, stuff like that, so that you can start having that experience. And these jobs are pretty flexible and they also pay really well. So I think that's like one of the new exciting jobs that this AI revolution is creating. And it's fun to be a part of it as well. Before the call, we'll send some links around so that all of you guys can check it out. But yeah, it's pretty exciting, and I think it's pretty valuable. I mean, because adding any of these labs to your resume and showing that you have experience directly with them, I think can definitely compound, especially like if eventually any of you end up starting a business or whatever it is, you're already comfortable with these types of processes, so you can create an AI native solution to a problem that you see, for example. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity right now, for sure.
Thank you, Rodrigo and Andrew. I do see some hand raised and some questions. Obviously, you're free to chat in the chat box, but I would say to keep your questions ready for the student Q&A session. I won't take up too much of the time with the moderated Q&A. We're going to move into the student Q&A soon. I would say keep your questions for then, and you'll get your chance to speak to our panelists. But moving on to my next question that I had. It was more about moving from big tech to a startup or vice versa. So, even if your experiences have been different, how would you say the how which one is easier, or how would you say students should navigate these scenarios? So, I don't know if Ethan, you wanted to give your input a little bit on this.
Sorry, what was the question?
Would you say it's easier to move from big tech to startup or the other way around? Or what would you suggest students do right out of college if they're figuring things out still?
Mm, mm, I think I've seen it go both ways. Like Andrew said, if you're at a startup and you're like doing a your role requires you to do like equivalent to what like a or manager role at a big tech would do, you're obviously going to be really competent. And then if the startup doesn't work, you can recruit for big tech, and hopefully you can communicate that competence. And then it goes the other way around. Like competence is something that's kind of hard to get, and like being in a bigger company where they're actually holding your hand and they have the time to like train you up, it's also a good way to gain competence. And then if you find a startup you have conviction in and you're ready to jump ship, I think there's no like golden rules in any of this, and it's all kind of like situation dependent. I would just emphasize the fact of like thinking about why you want to do what you're doing. Like, why do I want to get a job in big tech? Why do I want to work in a startup? Is it cloud? Is it money? Is it learning? Is it uh, you kind of need to have some sort of understanding of your motivation in order to help constrain your decision making path, or else you're kind of just like following what other people say, and like borrowing conviction from others is like never a recipe for success. I saw some question in the chat also, but like, oh, is this startup like if I have some financial obligation, is this startup good or not? Like, you cannot borrow conviction. You have to talk to the team and think like, oh, is this startup doing something like solving a problem that I think is valuable? Are they going about it in the right way? Can they realistically actually solve this problem and capture this market? Like, it's no golden rule here. You have to really like use your brain and like develop conviction yourself. Yeah.
Andrew and Rodrigo, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. Rodrigo probably has, personal experience here. I don't, but one of the early stage startups I was at, we hired a head of product that was from Amazon. And 1 week into it, they quit because there is no hand holding. The way it's not structured like it is at a big company where here's your to-do list, here's what you do, here's when you do it by. In many cases, when you enter a startup, they'll just say, you are the head of growth. We need you to figure out how to grow the company. We want to hit $1 million in ARR, and we don't know how to get there. We don't know what channels to use. We don't know all the different approaches for each of these channels. We just need you to be the executor of a plan that you come up with, and then start aggressively testing everything, and then what doesn't work, scrap it. What does work, keep doubling down. So that's the way you have to be. So I think when you grow up in a big tech company and then you pivot over to an early stage startup, it's probably really unenjoyable. And I think that you have that pivot less the older that you get, because the older you get, the more compensation matters for you, your PTO days, insurance, like all of these different things that don't matter to you at all in your 20s. But, once you hit your 30s and you start having children, all of those things matter a lot more to you. So I don't think you have that move backwards later in your career too often. I think it's in many cases the other way. You've been in startups for all of your 20s, and you made your way up to a VP of growth, and then you make a lateral move and be a VP of growth at Disney or something. So I think that's a more common case, at least from what I've seen with people that I know. I'm sure Rodrigo, he's spent 4 or 5 years at Amazon, and now he's a founder. So I'm sure he can probably tell you this issue with a lot more clarity.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. I mean, when you're working at any FANG company, I think there are definitely nuances between them. Amazon, even though it's, of course, it can be very corporate, in a way, it also requires you to be pretty scrappy and to experiment, constantly, which I liked. Um, but yeah, definitely when you're joining a startup or when you're founding a startup, the experimentation is on steroids and you have to do it very rapidly. But I mean, I think right now, and a lot of people have said this over the last year or so, right now is, I mean, the best time in history to build anything. The barrier to develop something that brings value is at an all-time low. All that it takes is an idea and determination and willpower to make it happen. So, yeah, I would encourage all of you to just start testing stuff and like I think Ethan mentioned it or Andrew as well. Anything that brings value in any way, I think is worth doing. So it doesn't, I mean, you don't have to be curing an epidemic or something that grandiose at first, but anything that just makes anyone's life a little bit better and brings value is definitely worth doing, in my opinion. And now is the best time to do it because there's resources that exist today that, for example, even when Andrew and I started Drafted, they weren't available. Everything's changing super quick. Um, so yeah, those are some of like the biggest differences, I'd say, the speed of experimentation and iteration.
Yeah, that is some great advice. Thank you, Rodrigo. So I guess for students who are trying to break into AI or otherwise in other industries, the startup industry, what advice would you give? Or in other words, what does a strong candidate for you at your startup look like? And anyone can answer.
I was going to ask you, what was that question to someone in particular, or?
No, yeah, I guess like to everyone, but yeah,
Okay,
anyone
okay,
can go
okay.
for it.
That's a good question.
Don't be shy, Rodrigo. Who would we hire? What are we looking for? We're looking for
Okay,
ambitious people, self-starters,
high
people like
agency.
just what I described is you can give someone a task and trust and understand that they might not know what the correct answers are today, but they'll be really efficient in figuring out what will work. And, everyone has to have a lot of low ego and patience. But if you're testing small and scaling what works quickly,
Yep.
everything is okay. But if you're terrified of making a wrong move, or you're asking for permission left and right, that's definitely not the culture at a startup. Failure is expected and it's embraced. Just learn from
Yep.
it and move on as quickly as possible. That's like the most important thing culture wise. I'm pretty sure across the board for most startups.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think in the point in history in which we're living at, more and more those traits that Andrew mentioned are going to be more important. So, if you pick a startup or a company that works in something that you're passionate about, that's definitely going to be to your advantage because it's more likely that you're going to come in every day energized and proactive and have high agency, which I think is ultimately what, all the startups that we've worked with are looking for. Someone who has high ownership, high agency, very energetic, creative, a true problem solver. And also, I think one of the cool things about this revolution that we're living in is it doesn't matter really what you're majoring in or what your background is, which I mean it's different from previous times in history. As long as you're passionate about what you're doing and you have a real mindset of problem solving and maybe thinking outside the box, it goes a long way. And yeah, more and more we're being freed up to do the things that humans in general are good at, which require creativity and problem solving. So I think it's an exciting time. That's the reason why in Drafted, in the beginning, we created a system to generate what we call culture tags. So you guys will see it when you guys onboard. You will record 3 videos, and you have the option to also show something that you've built. And then, we have a system that generates 3 or 4 culture tags, which can be, anything ranging from leadership to creativity to thinking outside the box with evidence as to why that candidate displays that. And startups really get a kick out of that because that's one of the things that they told us was hard to like find for them, finding great culture fits, which becomes more and more important as we live in an era where everything is getting more and more automated, is what I feel.
Yeah, I agree. Like, with everything said, like number one characteristic is like agency and ability to execute. Like more and more, I actually in college did this little side project called UniStart. It's like a startup database thing, and you can see like all the different startups from all the different universities. And like we noticed like more and more like prestige, background, school, clout, like major clout. It all doesn't matter. Like it matters to an extent for sure. Like I mean, it definitely does matter. Like it's good we're going to USC, but it's not going to carry you to the moon. Like uh, whoever had the dog in them, they're gonna rise above. And I think like maybe an actionable tip for like finding a job based on this fact that like ownership and execution ability matters the most is like you shouldn't be just asking for internship like, hey man, like is your startup hiring? Like I love AI, whatever. You should be actually demonstrating competence in like something that the company's looking for. Like if you're applying for a go-to-market role, here's like a UGC plan and some sample content that would help really pop, like make your product grow. Or if you're applying for a sales job, like I've qualified this list of leads that would be perfect for your guys' product. Like, should I make the introduction? Or if it's a venture job, like here's like 10 startups I think your company would, your firm would invest in, and like here's my memo from talking with the founder. Like showing some sort of ability to actually do the job before you get it. I think it's like one of the most it's like a really good strategy for recruiting versus like cold outreach and just asking like, hey, you guys hiring? Can I get referral? It feels like it feels like if you put the effort to do a little bit more, it de-risks you as a hire from the company perspective.
We're in Unistart, by the way, Ethan. So good
Let's
stuff.
go. Let's go.
Yeah, we've been in it for a while. Congrats.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Thank you guys. Those were actually really helpful for me too as a student. But like this will be my last questions. I do see a lot of questions in the chat, so we can move on to the student Q&A right after this. I know that you guys already mentioned some of the stuff student can do, but now, as you said, things are changing so quickly. So are there anything that students can do while they're on campus at USC, other than the traditional full-time jobs, internships route? Because now there are several things accessible through AI or data-oriented companies. So is there any suggestions you would give students who are still in school? I think Andrew, you can
Rodrigo,
start us off.
you did something. I didn't do this because I was running my own company,
Mhm.
but I remember in the basement of Marshall there was Blackstone Launchpad. They helped me a
Yep.
ton in regards to figuring out how to do stuff. They were mentoring me and kind of giving me approaches on marketing and growing the business. And there was no
Yep.
upside for them. So I would just, when you do start your own projects, running it by all of those opportunities. I'm sure there's pitches, pitch competitions. I know that there's an incubator on campus. One of my friends
Hmm.
was in there as well,
Lava
and he
Lab.
ended up,
I was part
yeah,
of it.
he or no, it was the USC incubator. I think it's
Oh
separate
yeah,
from Lava Lab,
there's a
but
couple.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
that that company went on to sell to Apple. So using all of these resources and researching what the resources are, I think are incredibly
Mhm.
important. Yeah, it's Paul Orlando's incubator. I think a ton of people, when you look at the Career Center, which is kind of, we know a ton of data on them, less than 10% of students actually interact with them. And their whole job is to help you with your outreach, help you get roles, get interviews, make introductions, give you practice in interviews. Like there are so many resources that 90% of students aren't using. And I suspect it's probably identical for people that are trying to start their own businesses. So just reach out to everyone, ask the entrepreneurship professors. I'm sure they know all of these different initiatives that they have, and just make sure that you're using all of these things while you have access to them, because once you finish
Yep.
school, you're not going to go back and do all these things. So do your research and use them. You're paying for them, might as well.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely recommend Level Up. I was a part of it, and the cool thing is that they pair you with two or other members, and then you create a product, and then you pitch to investors at the end, which we did. It was an amazing experience, and you can start building your network. Usually, a lot of startups and ideas just are originated from those organic interactions, and just talking about something with someone, and then you connect on something that you both care about, whether it's you by yourself or someone else or three, four people, and then you start working on it, and you create something, and you know starts creating interest.
Yeah, I would say, aside from the advice already given, like joining these clubs, building projects and doing hackathons, researching about and getting conviction in what kind of tech you're interested in. Um, I would say like the point earlier about how like prestige and the quality of school, like you can make it by yourself if you have the dog in you and you build something goated, you're gonna make it. But USC's Trojan Network is actually pretty real, and like uh, USC has like kind of self-selected like people past a certain level of like goodness for you to be around, and there's definitely like a cohort of kids every single year that go on to big tech or go on to like cloudy Silicon Valley startups or go on to raise their own things, and there is like a social group there. So like uh, you can get into that social group. It's going to be, I think, helpful throughout your tech career because these guys are going to be like doing goaded things alongside you. Um, and there's a lot of alpha in like in the gossip and just like knowing what other people are doing in the tech industry. That's one point. But I would also want to like emphasize that it's not limited just to USC. Like USC is the easiest because like you can like grab a beer with them after class or something like that, or like you can go like hang out with them because physical proximity. But I had a lot of success from like making connections with friends based purely on like not proximity, but purely on like shared interest and like kind of like yeah, like we're let's say we're applying for the same type of job or we're interested in the same technology. You can like reach out to kids from like Harvard, Stanford, or any school or anyone from like internet who's interested in the same thing. Maybe you guys are like still noobs and you guys don't have the skills to actually build something great or whatever, but just like having buddies who are in the same boat as you, like it doesn't have to be at USC, but it can be outside of around the country. I think those friendships and those connections have also really helped me. And like tech is something that like um, goes above physical world, right? So you can like there's definitely edge in that as well. There's fellowships like venture funds host fellowships. Like Kleiner Perkins has like a goaded fellowship. Ripple Ventures is one that I did in Toronto that was really good. And there's a lot of these like programs outside of school that are really good. Yeah, are really good.
Thank you for all the advice. I'm sure our students appreciate it. I'm gonna now move on to the student Q&A. Um, yeah, so students with cameras on and virtual hands raised will get the priority to ask questions, but also feel free to put your questions in the chat. I know some of your questions probably have been answered already, but if you have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Don't be shy, guys. Wait, so how does it
I
work? Anyone can
remember.
raise their virtual hand.
Yeah, I do remember seeing one hand like earlier in the panel. I don't know if Sean is still in the
They
meeting, but if
they
you
raised it
are,
down.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I guess anyone can just jump in. Uh, if not, we're gonna start picking random people. How about that?
You're making everyone's nightmares come true with that one, Rodrigo.
Um, if like no one else has a question, I'll start. Hopefully you
Sure.
guys think of your questions by then. But I have a question. As a student myself, I find it a little difficult to network. Just like as a person who's introverted. So how would you
Mhm.
say? I know the Trojan Network is very real, and it's like people are
Yeah.
always willing to help when you reach out. How would you say, like for someone who's trying to make an effort in like looking for a job or looking for an internship, how would you say like networking, like I can improve my networking skills, I guess.
Yeah, I
A good
think
question.
in regards to networking, you just need to use every kind of edge that you have. So, for example, if we both have a common investor, that's an angle for an introduction, or at least 10x your chances of getting in touch with someone. USC is a huge network, so obviously there's tons of founders that are going to be hiring. If you look at the companies in South California, you're going to have a ton of Trojans where you can just set up a call, talk to them,
Yep.
understand their business. I don't think that hurts. That's probably not going to help for a large company to get a role, but it could lead to a referral. I know Rodrigo probably did handfuls of referrals at Amazon for folks in the USC
Yep.
network, and
Yep.
I think use any edge that you have. If Rodrigo's from Venezuela, Jewish and Ukrainian and Russian, so that's an edge too. Whatever angles you have, that's a commonality with someone else. It doesn't just have to be where you went to school. You use it and you try to get an introduction or an investor or a co-founder. Like that's how Rodrigo and I started the business. We went to school together and we took completely different paths post university, but we linked back up because of the Trojan Network, and we knew that at a minimum I have a good business mind, and at a minimum he has a good computer science background. And I think that's really important. It's a good filtering mechanism for us, so definitely lean on it as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's great advice. I'll try to use that next time. But I do see a question in the chat from Jack. How do I avoid my product idea from getting stolen?
You can't think
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
I was typing
You
away
can't
right
think like
now.
that. Rodrigo can probably talk to this a little bit
Yeah.
more, but we can build any business from scratch at this point, especially with AI in what days, if not weeks, you can build carbon copies of anything at this point. So
Yes.
your your differentiator is your distribution, how quickly you can get out there and be loud, and
Yep.
once you do have a position in the market, how can you keep innovating on your go to market, on your growth strategies, on your product to continually move. But
Yes.
those big companies that a startup is trying to displace, they're not making huge bets and pivoting as quickly as a startup can. You as a startup, you can completely change your whole business model or 10x your prices. You can do crazy stuff that a big company is just incapable of doing. So I wouldn't worry about
Yeah.
that too much.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read Jack what I wrote because I didn't know if we were answering that in person, like saying it or not. So yeah, in line with what Andrew said. So I said the barrier to build is at an all-time low. Don't worry about your idea getting stolen. Just focus on your customers and providing value and distribution, like Andrew mentioned. There's a massive land grab on all fronts ongoing right now, and there's more space for competitors than you would ever think. Is what I would say. Um, yeah.
Thank you. I do see another question, and I think Ethan already responded, and Rodrigo as well. But I'll still read it out in case like you want to add something more. Law student here. Any suggestions on connecting with business students and developers on campus as potential co-founders, aside from what's already been discussed? This is from Kevin.
Yeah, I'll say something that we all here in this call have an unfair advantage towards. First of all, the Trojan network is 100% real. I mean, Andrew and I live in Miami, and we've met with people from SC who openly want to support and want to help us on our journey. So that's number one. And then number two is, I think the nature of our community, the Trojan community, is very entrepreneurial. So it doesn't matter what major you are or what school you're in, chances are you're always going to find someone who's open to building something or wanting to build something. So fully leverage that. I mean, and that's not usually the case with all schools. I think that's a trait in the community specific to our school, and I'm not sure why that is the case, but fully leverage it. I mean, there's many clubs, many organizations. You can just go or, just start attending the events that you all have access to. I mean, the you will see the whole thing about the Trojan network after graduation, like myself and Andrew have seen. But while you're in school, there's always stuff going on. Just get yourself out there. If you have an idea, start talking to people. And then, yeah, like to Jack's question, don't worry about your idea getting stolen. There's a massive, massive land grab out there on all fronts. We're living in an age where there's many, I mean, it's a golden age, many golden ages at the same time, which is awesome. And yeah, just get yourself out there, talk to people, a lot of ideas, come out of organic conversations or just, maybe building a project together for a class and you come up with an idea and you commercialize it. So that's what I would say. Leverage that unique aspect that we have from USC, which is that, it's a very entrepreneurial community. I think Zane, thank you for turning on the camera. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. I just want to say I really appreciate you guys being here. Some good information and everything. I was working on something on the side, some homework. But my question
Nice.
was, you guys mentioned that the most important factor for at least your hiring process and startups in general was that mindset and the mentality that even if you don't have the answers today, by tomorrow or the day after, you can go out and find that and you know that you have that in you. What's the best way that someone has come to you and demonstrated that capability in your personal experience? Maybe it was a partner, a co-founder, a student, anybody who's come to you and really impressed you. What have they done that did so?
So we hired this like 17-year-old. So the product we're building is like deeply financial. So we hired this like 17-year-old French boy from like this French village who doesn't speak like too good English, but he like types good enough. And like the reason we brought him on is because like without even he expressed interest for internship or for work, and we're like not having the bandwidth to entertain these kind of like, yo man, please give me a job. We get thousands of this kind of thing a day, and it's also like it's an attack vector for like security purposes. So we didn't really engage, and he sends like a comprehensive like plan identifying here's the problems like facing that you guys are facing with respect to growth. This is why that these problems are occurring, and these are the possible ways out for you to solve these problems. And maybe it was like less than 500 words, but really really well thought out, and it's exactly what we were thinking internally. So it just demonstrates that like he's on the same wavelength and like bro knows what's up. And like for a product that's pretty idiosyncratic, like and pretty like niche, to find a guy, no matter who he is, who like knows what's up, it's someone who's like worth working with. So that's like one example. And in venture, when I worked in venture, we hired some interns, and it was just because they found good deal flow. Like they were able to do my job for me, which is like the same as the first French boy I mentioned. So those are like two examples from my experience.
Thank you.
I think I think you'll just see this across the board. Like company post job, they're going to get, 50 resumes from here, 150 from this platform. Like the people that really cut through and just go straight to the founder, they figure out what their email is, they figure out what projects they're working on or what's important to them, and then showing that I've already done, some sliver of this. This isn't a scalable solution. You can't do this for 100 different companies. Like you really want to pick your shots when you kind of go all in like that. But it's obviously going to resonate with a founder if they're hiring for a social media role, and you roll up with UGC content they can start using or start vetting what your work will look like, so that they're not guessing like, oh, he built a website when he was in university, but we don't even can't look at it. Like just setting yourself apart from all of those folks with a PDF resume is kind of
Yep.
the general thing that you're going to see across all founders.
I think Drew has a hand raise. You can unmute.
Hi guys, thank you so much for making the time for us tonight. I was wondering if you guys could share a little bit about some challenges or problems you guys are facing right now in your work, so we could get kind of a good sense of what you guys are working on today. And also, Andrew, I think you used to have a YouTube channel while you were building your USC product. I used to watch that when I was like back in high school. So thank you for
Nice.
that.
That's that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I tried to do that. It was social media was a great driver for my first business. I focused a ton on Instagram too and was reposting all the articles that were coming out. So that was really important. Like I think something that Ethan is kind of talking about, especially with X, going out there and being vulnerable. The community generally calls this building in public. So it can be, you might be revealing your cards too much to competitors if you're constantly documenting every part of the journey. So it makes it a lot easier. Like someone can literally just copy paste your whole LinkedIn building a public feed, throw it into ChatGPT and say, give me the product roadmap of everything this person did and just replicate it. So you want to hold some cards close, but yeah, building in public definitely works, especially as a student, because you have so much lift from social media platforms, the algorithms, and everything else. But what was your question so that I don't, forget it?
If you guys could talk about like a challenge or problem you guys are facing currently with what you're working on.
Yeah. So in startups, everything is a challenge and a problem. So you're trying to grow, you're trying to always raise money, you're launching new products, you're figuring out how to build that. Rodrigo's putting the pieces together constantly. There's bugs all over the place. Like every startup is going to have everything breaking and you're working on so many different fronts. So we're firing off, on all cylinders in all directions. But that is the exciting part, is if you put these puzzle pieces together and you're a founder, you can have exceptional outcomes one day. So, that's the exciting part of being in this game.
Thank you.
Of course.
Great question.
Thank you, Drew. I think Bostel asked a question in the chat, which I think Ethan responded to, but I'm going to read it out again just in case anyone else wanted to add something. I have been building software for a while now, having built several end-to-end products that solve real world problems. Do you have any advice on how I can better showcase myself to differentiate from the crowd? We'll be joining Drafted after the call, of course.
We love that. And I think um, that's really why we built Drafted in a very particular way. I found it that in today's world, there are resume builders all over the place. Everyone is using them. And the way that you generally do it is you upload the job description of a certain job, you run it through, your resume, and it customizes it. And at the end of the day, for the entry level crowd, what ends up happening is all these roles just end up having all of the exact same resumes. And what they're going to end up filtering for in that case is, did you go to a top tier university? So if you went to a top 10, we don't know what their filter is. It could be top 25, it could be local universities. But in regards to standing out, that's why we have a short video resume on our platform. It's the 3 most common questions asked during a first phone interview or phone screen. And really, that gives you a chance to at least get them to listen to your story a little bit and see what makes you unique, what makes you stand out against other candidates. And I think that's the most important thing, because when we were talking to students when we first started building the product, is a lot of them were just saying if they just got on the phone with me for 5 minutes, if they just got on a Zoom call for 5 minutes, they would understand that I'm completely different. I built, XYZ projects or whatever made you special. It really doesn't stand out in a resume where folks are just skimming through as quickly as possible. So I think, using our platform gives you a really good leg up outside of, directly engaging with the founder, whether it's on email or LinkedIn with, something completely custom and tailored to them. I think that's, one way to do it. But with our approach, it's that same kind of premise, but at scale. So that's kind of what I would say there.
Yeah, I think like Andrew said, the quicker you can show things that you've built or anything that sets you apart, I think the more valuable that is to any recruiter, to be honest. And yeah, not to self-promote, but yeah, Drafted is a good way to do that for sure. Maybe the best. But yeah,
Um,
definitely like being project based is great for founders because one complaint that we have gotten from them or like a challenge that they face is they will go ahead and hire a resume perfect candidate from a great school, perfect credentials. And then in 6 months or less, they have to let them go because either they weren't a great culture fit or they just didn't, contribute in the way that they expected, basically. And that has informed a lot of our product decisions from our end. Like, how do we capture those things upfront?
yeah,
Hopefully
hopefully
that makes
that
sense.
answers your question. Yeah, that Vasil, I don't know if you're still in the meeting, but hopefully that answered your question. Zane, did you have another question?
I actually didn't. I just left the camera on this time because I felt kind
Oh,
of
okay.
bad.
No, no, you're
But
good.
That's the
Yeah, I
spirit.
was
That's the spirit. I like it.
actually, I will ask something though.
Go ahead.
This is a question for the entire crowd. If you guys are willing to answer, it could be like company secret. If not, don't worry about it. But you guys mentioned a lot about how it's feasible to copy pretty much I
Mhm.
um any like stack, any product that's out there. What kind of software, hardware, what does your workflow look like utilizing AI in this like day and age? What's the modern stuff?
That's a good question. I think I can tackle that first. Are you first of all saying what's your what year are you? What major? I'm just curious.
I'm an aerospace major and a
Aerospace.
freshman, yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, first of all, it evolves and it changes constantly, is what I will tell you. Because I mean, this is sort of how I look at it. Not only do you have the big AI labs and main vendors such as Anthropic, OpenAI, and Perplexity shipping very good stuff, but also you have a bunch of other like, ancillary companies also shipping great stuff, a lot of them open source, meaning free. It's like, for example, recently what I started doing is aside from using like Cursor and Windsurf for actual development, I'm also using this thing called Open Code, which is model agnostic, meaning you can plug in like whether it's Claude or GPT or Gemini from Google, whatever it is, you can switch it around. And it basically serves as like the brain for all of your operations. And then depending on what task you want to do, it chooses an agent that is specialized for each thing. Like for example, if you're okay, I don't know much about aerospace engineering, but I'll try my best. For example, if you're trying to research what the latest breakthroughs are in aerospace engineering, it will select an agent that is good at deep research, and it will, basically command that agent to do XYZ on this specific subject, and then come back to you with information. Maybe, I don't know, you want to build a simple website for a project, then it will choose another agent that is specialized for it. Anthropic recently came up with this concept of skills. So what skills do is you can specialize agents to do different things. If it's front-end development or just deep research or even aerospace engineering. We're entering an age in which you have agents that you can deploy and do things asynchronously, meaning you just tell them to do it, and then you can do whatever, and then you come back to it, and it will tell you what it found or what it did, basically. So yeah, I mean, I use Open Code, I use Cursor, I use Perplexity. Perplexity I like very much because it has like very up-to-date information. So like if you want to learn about things that may be happening very recently, Perplexity is very good at research in that way. I've also used this thing called LangChain. So LangChain is like an orchestrator of different agents. And it can be, I mean, it can be anything. It can be like from OpenAI, Anthropic, or whatever. And then you can create workflows to do anything. Like, for example, if any of you working in business, it can create an Excel sheet from certain data automatically every week, or, anytime the data changes, stuff like that. Like, that's the flow that people are adopting, having agents that are very good at doing specific things, narrow things, and deploying them in a smart way to do everything that you need. And there's also handoff between agents. Like the research agent could find info and then tell the coding agent to develop something, for example. It sounds very abstract, but that's like what I've seen. I don't know if Ethan has another experience or if you want to add
Yeah.
anything.
Aside from like this is like this is like made me I completely agree with this like multi-agent thing because
Yeah.
having the generic like ChatGPT Claude Code like let the engineer become like 10x better whatever. Like we're
Yeah.
doing blockchain based development, which is like using Solidity,
Nice.
and it's you can't you can use AI to help you, but it needs to be done by a human. Like there's money, there's like money going to these contract this code. It can't be messed up. But for business use case and technical use case, I've been really interested in these multi-agent systems that are like, for example, like we recently did like a code review. So whenever we publish a product, like push a product to production, we need to like pay a lot of money to let hackers try to hack the code to make sure there's no bugs, so that when users put money in, their money is safe. And this like our V1 product costs like 75K just for like code review, which is like sounds crazy, but this is like industry standard. So we recently tried like for a smaller product to use like multi-agent penetration testing thing, and we were surprised with the results. It actually like found some low level vulnerability. Like we were pretty confident in the code, but it found some low level vulnerabilities that I was like surprised by. So I think um, the way it works is like it runs the code through like a LLM. That it produces some like list of bugs, and most of it is BS. And then there's a checker agent that comes and pulls each one and tries to like create a proof of concept. Would this hack actually work in production? And then if yes, it like does some more steps to like simulate it so we can actually get like a transaction proving that this hack is executable. And then the last step is there's a human in the loop that verifies all of these are not like false positives. So this is one example of like how using multi-agent system, like with human in the loop still, like cut down our cost for this audit like by so much. And I think there's only going to be more of these kind of multi-agent things that are just like killing traditional service businesses. For example, in a business use case, like instead of like hiring like a go-to-market consultancy or like even hiring a sales guy, I think if you're doing like standard any kind of standard sales, B2B sales, or like
Yeah.
outreach, like you can have like a research agent research each potential client, qualify the lead, an outreach agent who talks to the email and he writes the emails out, like, and then a guy who's like internal, like scheduling it all in, making sure everyone's free. Like I think I heard people with like this new like open, Claude bot thing, like the Molt thing. It's like a bit
Hmm.
security risk, so we haven't done it yet. But there's people who have like dedicated machines, and there's like basically a business multi-agent business development guy in the computer doing link, like he has his own LinkedIn, he has his own WhatsApp, he has his own email, and that multi-agent system is able to basically just like replace a sales guy, like a low-level sales guy, and like go get leads and schedule meetings. Like I think these multi-agent system thing, it's pretty sexy. But anyways.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I see Christopher raise his hand, so you can ask your question.
Yeah, hi, my name's Chris. Yeah, hi, my name's Chris. I just want to say thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to talk to all of us. My idea is more, or my question is more revolving about like the idea of a startup itself. With companies like Google and OpenAI and Anthropic, having like a huge budget to pursue like other projects that like a startup would not have the same amount of access to money from unless it's like VC funded. Um, what would you like recommend to like focus on in like a specific idea to not be like getting run over by like these big giant tech companies?
That's a great question. I think I can give that a shot. There's this really great talk by Paul Graham, who is the Y Combinator founder, and he talks about this. One of the things that allows small, nimble teams to overtake giants, or at least prevent giants from completely annihilating them, at least in the beginning, is You can go ahead and do things that don't scale. That's like one of like his whole mantra, do things that don't scale. And I'll give you an example. When Airbnb was starting out, they were struggling with getting customers. Okay. They had a working platform. They barely had any distribution, and they weren't getting any, yeah, pretty much any traction at all or organic growth. One of the pushback that they got was people were scared of living in a stranger's home, especially the pictures looked really bad. So one thing that they did is they went to New York where they had most of their users with a professional photographer, and they took pictures of all the, I mean, they made sure the homes looked good and then took pictures with a professional photographer, sometimes even themselves. And that helped them get over that hurdle. So one of the things that startups can do to beat large companies is do things that don't scale. Go to your customer, talk directly with your customer. Sometimes even build something customer just for a particular customer. That can work too. And sort of become like take on like a consultant sort of role for a customer or a set of small customers and then grow from there. This guy, Paul Graham, who I definitely recommend his content, also talks about starting a small fire. Like even if you just get 3 to 4 customers in the beginning and they really love you, that's an amazing start. They'll recommend you and grow from there. So you can do things that don't scale. You can go to your customers, talk to them, build custom stuff, do whatever it takes, like the Airbnb guys did with the professional photographer and the camera. Even themselves, they did it. So that's one thing that you can do. Because the thing is, you have to remember, Christopher, that large companies are by nature very bureaucratic and slow moving, and they may not see things or may not be able to act at the speed that, for example, you and your startup can. And that's an advantage. That's a big edge. And that's why, we live in a nation which constantly more and more startups are getting started and growing and being successful, even when there's, such an amount of big players already. Now we have like, the new cohort of AI labs, which are like the next sort of type of big companies, I guess. But even with the big AI labs, there are small spots that you can address and tackle and do things that don't scale and build your moat around that. Just start a small fire with a couple customers, make them love you, whatever it takes, even if it's all custom, even if it requires no code, whatever it is. There's a lot of examples on that. I think the Instacart guys also at the beginning, they had no one delivering their things but the founders themselves. And all that it did was if someone orders something, it would send them a text message and they would go and just take it there. Like, but they would act like they had like a whole fleet of people doing it. Those are the types of things that you can do, surprisingly, that can help you get started and not get annihilated by a Google or a Meta or whatever it is. Because they were small ones too.
Yeah,
It's a good question though.
it's a great question. I agree with everything Rodrigo said, and about like moving fast is your edge. Some markets are too small for big players. One
Yep.
point, in addition, is like sometimes things are non-consensus. Like sometimes you can have some sort of insight about what's going to be valuable or what's a problem that a big like that other people don't agree with. And this is another form
Yes.
of like edge that is ripe for the taking by startup versus incumbent. Like, um, I think big hotel company couldn't have done Airbnb, even though it's like they would have printed
Right.
if they did it because it was like
Mhm.
regulatorily uncertain and maybe they're already a big boy making a lot of money. They're not going to risk by doing
Yes.
like same with Polymarket. Polymarket like prediction market. It's like a new spin on binary options, and it was like, oh, who's gonna bet on things outside of politics? And this guy Shane Copeland, he's our age. I
Yep.
mean, he's like your guys. He's like our age, and he's like, no, this is gonna be huge. And for like 3 or 4 or 5 years, he build same product, same conviction. No, everyone doesn't believe him, and now it's a $10 billion company. So like, bet on yourself and your own convictions is another path.
Yes. Definitely agree. 100%. Like Ethan said, like, you will be able to see things that maybe big companies don't. Perfect example, like Ethan mentioned, hotels with Airbnb. And that ties into another interesting subject, which is by nature, when you're starting something, startup, you're going against the grain because usually it's something that either doesn't exist or is not socially acceptable. So you're essentially finding a secret or something contrarian that people don't know yet, and you're presenting it to the world.
Um, yeah, so yeah, everything you said is, can you guys hear me by the way?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, sorry.
Oh, is it me or?
No, I think, yeah, I think his video is lagging.
Okay. Zane, you want to cover for him or? Is he your friend?
I don't know.
Oh, okay, okay. Now you're friends.
Wait, sorry, can you hear me now? My Wi-Fi is really bad right now.
No worries, man. Yes, we're here.
Sorry. Okay, yeah, my question is more regarding that, like the topic you were saying, how like a really big advantage for startups is the speed at which you can operate. So would you say that like whatever product you're going to try to develop or service, if you want it to be something that can be changed and implemented and then like redistributed like very quickly? Like for example, because my thought is like
Mhm. Lost him again.
drug development, it's like one of the longest process to get like it approved and all this stuff. And so like from just like what I've seen in the biotech industry, it's pretty hard for
I think I know what he's getting at though. Ethan, are you able to hear him or is it me?
Yeah, I also can't hear. I also get the vibe,
Oh,
but it's biotech specific though, which is like a bit of a curveball.
yeah, that's I don't have much experience there. I do get the vibe too though.
Christopher,
Are
you
Christopher,
can
kids
hear.
you can
kids even
type it if
mostly
you want.
developing?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he can type it too. In the meantime, if anyone has any other questions, no.
I want to say, like, I think the guy was basically going in the direction of like, I think my answer to what I think this guy's doing is like, I think a lot of things, a
Hmm.
lot of problem I see with young founder or like young tech enthusiasts is like paralysis by
Hmm.
analysis. Like, oh my God, like what do the wise tech gurus think about framework do they have for solving this? Or like what about you're trying to cover all the bases before you start even moving. But I think the
Yeah.
one thing that and that's like the worst thing you can do. You should just really get your hands dirty, get started, and action creates information. You're not a genius, like, even though you might have a lot of conviction in your idea. Like you're not a god yet, but you can get there. But you have to like take the first step to get there. And by taking each step, you're gonna like be challenging your assumptions, testing your hypothesis, getting new information, and then you're gonna be able to build a better product. And like just if you think at square one, oh, it's not helping me think through this $1 billion business plan, it's not gonna get you anywhere. So like take the first step anyways. That's my but the drug development is different because you have to spend a lot of money for drug development, so it's hard. And as a yeah, so that's why the drug development thing is and like hardware, things that are high capex, it's harder to get just like send it, you know. So he has a point there, but anyways.
Yeah, yeah. Vatsal asked a great question. I'm sorry if my answer was a little bit esoteric, but that's what I think. So he asked,
Yeah.
that's actually a great question. How do you guys get better every day? I believe it would be different from the traditional path people. And what I said is, I think it's a combination of being genuinely passionate about what you're building and the problem you're solving and continued experimentation. And I know that sometimes continued experimentation takes courage and determination. No one likes to obviously be wrong or put yourself out there. It can be scary. But once you lose that fear, it's like you have complete freedom. I mean, you can experiment as many times as you want. It doesn't matter if you fail. You will always learn something, is what I feel. Um, yeah, I think it's a great question though.
I think Christopher is back on the call, but before we proceed, like Christopher, I think your question is going to be our last one. So after that, we're going to start wrapping up. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, if you're having Wi-Fi issues, you could probably type your question in the chat.
Turn camera off maybe as well.
I'm dropping our emails as well. Happy to connect and chat whenever.
Yeah, I have no LinkedIn, but feel free to add me on Twitter.
Let's get connected, Ethan, for sure.
Yes, sir.
Would love
Yes,
to.
sir.
Christopher, right? Yeah. feel free to just email us or yeah, there you go. Or Ethan. Cool. Great.
Yeah, I think if Christopher, you don't have a question right now, you can obviously contact our panelists. Oh, okay,
He's
sorry. Yeah,
back.
go ahead.
He's back.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay,
Go for it. Go for it.
I'm gonna try to say it quick so it doesn't cut out. Oh my God. Oh wait. Okay, sorry. I'm
You're good. You're
um
good.
basically my question is like for like a service or a product that is like inherently hard to implement quickly, like biotech, that takes like a lot of time to do research and develop to like create a real like serviceable product. Like, what are your thoughts on like getting into a field like that? That's for a startup because you were saying earlier how like an important thing for some of these tech startups is how they're able to implement and do things quickly and like it's not so bureaucratic like a big tech company.
So your question is how to achieve that speed in somewhere like biotech?
Not so much how to achieve that speed, but
Uh-huh.
would you like recommend going into trying to start a startup in biotech, or would you think that's like just like you're like at a big disadvantage by trying to go starting your first startup and something like that, since you're like losing the advantage of like being able to implement something quicker?
That's interesting because Andrew, my co-founder, who unfortunately had to drop, his first company was called Brain Z, so brains with a Z. And what he did is he created a natural organic supplement for focus, like mainly for study, all natural ingredients. And his journey was pretty cool. Like he talked to different labs and he was able to like create like a proprietary formula and all of that. To be honest, I don't know much. I don't know much about that space. And what I will tell you is in whatever field you want to get into, I think there's always going to be some sort of opportunity and there's the tools to research and build stuff that we never had before and it's getting better and better and better. So I would say, definitely go for it, go deep into it, become a knowledgeable or go deep in terms of knowledge in something that interests you, whether it's in biotech or whatever it is, and then just go for it. Yeah, like I said, I don't know much about biotech in specific. What I do know is there's an array of great tools out there that you can use to quickly gain knowledge and become an expert quickly in different things. And you can go ahead and build stuff pretty quickly too, is what I'd say.
I agree. Like, I also don't know much, but we've been talking a lot about software in this call because that's what we both do. But hardware and robotics and genetic biotech and all this stuff, it's super lucrative and it's super valuable for the world, and
Yep.
it's equally as valuable as a business. The barrier to entry may be higher, but um, you should be doing something, as I said earlier, because you have conviction. So let's say you do have conviction in this new drug idea. Like, what's the next step in validating that conviction? It's like maybe doing some sort of research at a lab at USC where you're able to like test this thesis on a small scale, or
Yes.
maybe you use AI tools. I know there's like big business right now in like simulating drugs effects on different combinations of like different humans have different genomes, and you can have like different humans based like with different DNA like simulated, and then simulate this one drug's effect on all these different types of people. It can all be done on computer. I might be talking out of my ass, but there's definitely ways to simulate this without spending $1 million for trial number one, So that's like where the scrappy, like move fast and break
Yes.
things kind of mentality comes in.
Correct.
Thank you everyone. Sorry, we are unfortunately running out of
Wait,
time, but
one last
Christopher,
thing
thank
that I
sorry.
wanted to add to Ethan's point, because I think he said a brilliant point. It doesn't matter if your first attempt is something super small scale, like the example that Ethan said, just anything that's small can grow quickly, very quickly. So, just if you're doing something very small, whether that's just one customer or just one little test in a lab, like Ethan mentioned, that can grow quickly in an unprecedented manner. So don't be discouraged by starting very, very small. Some of the best things start that way, is what I'd see, is what I believe and what I've seen.
Yeah,
Sorry, Hona.
thank no, no, you're good. You're good. This was an amazing conversation. I wish we could like go on for longer, but unfortunately we have to cut it short. Thank you for all your questions, very thoughtful questions. And thank you, a huge thank you actually to all our panelists. I know Andrew had to drop off, but thank you, Andrew, Rodrigo, Ethan. You guys had such insightful comments, and I'm sure like our students enjoyed the panel very much. So I know you guys shared your emails, but I'll also share the slides, and obviously the recording will be available on YouTube. So feel free to reach out to them. They're really helpful, incredible people. And yeah, I think that's for today. And thank you again for attending. And yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks for the
everyone.
shout out, Ethan. Feel free to reach out, sign up.